Hi, I'm a photographer and this is Inside Motorsport. In this episode, I'll take you behind the scenes of Porsche Carrera Cup Italy's pre-season tests, held at Monza on April 16th. The Porsche Carrera Cup Italy is one of the most prestigious national GT championships, featuring professional and amateur drivers competing in identical Porsche 911 GT3 Cup cars. It's known for being the most prestigious Porsche one-make championship in Italy, and a stepping stone towards the Porsche Mobile 1 Super Cup, which runs alongside Formula 1 during 8 European weekends. The main reason I went to the racetrack that day was to help the Instagram page Squadra Corse, with the filming of an interview with Diego Bertonelli, a driver for the team The Driving Experience. Also, this was an important step in my journey, as it was my first time in the paddock. For these reasons, I spent most of the day in the pit lane or inside the team's garage, except for the end of the morning, when I went to the Roja chicane to take some photos of the cars on track. The weather that day was sunny and windy in the morning, and rainy in the afternoon. That day, I arrived at the circuit shortly after 10, and just before heading to the paddock, I stopped for a few minutes outside the Ascari chicane exit, from where I spotted a gravel excursion by Hoffner, driver for Malucelli Motorsport. After a quick visit to the garage, I spent the final part of the morning session at the Roger chicane. Almost all the competitors were on track, taking advantage of the dry conditions to complete some laps. Once back in the paddock, during the lunch break, we recorded the interview with Bertonelli, in which he showed several details of his steering wheel, introduced us to his helmet, and answered a few surprise questions. In particular, he told us that during his karting years, he raced against several current Formula 1 drivers, including Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc, Albon, and many others. I took a few pictures of him, first holding his steering wheel, and then inside the motorhome, while he was looking at his helmet. I took some more photos of it throughout the day. Starting from a carbon base, it features red, white, and green colors, with the driver's name written low on both sides. At 2 p.m., just before the afternoon session, the official photoshoot of the series was scheduled. All the cars had to line up on the main straight for the traditional group picture, which is later used for promotional materials and season presentations. The drivers started leaving the pit lane around 1:45. Once they reached the main straight at the end of the outlap, they stopped at the beginning of the starting grid. From there, a steward and 3 championship officials directed them further down the straight, so the cars could line up in a pre-arranged order. On the grid, I had the chance to take many photos of the cars, of a large group of drivers chatting with each other, and of several helmets, which had been placed together near the pit wall. This is my favorite of the day. The machines of the reigning champion King and Masters, William Mezzetti and Diego Bertonelli, lined up on the front row, almost as if they were racing each other. At one point, almost all the drivers gathered around 2 championship officials, who were probably explaining how they were supposed to proceed. Shortly after, everyone got into their respective cars, waiting for further instructions. And this is what was happening in the background. One of the official photographers was standing on an elevated platform lifted by a tractor, from where he gave directions to everyone on the grid. Below him were most of the other photographers and videomakers on site, and this is what their cameras could see from that perspective. A few minutes later, we were asked to move from the edge of the track to the pit lane, and the car set off for a lap behind the tractor where the photographer was standing, so he could get some shots for a way cooler perspective. At that point, I went back to the garage of the driving experience, where I spent the rest of the day. The afternoon session started at 2:30 p.m. The team's drivers went out for a few laps, but soon came in, as rain had started to fall on the circuit. It got heavier as the day went on, so only a handful of drivers went back out on track. Most teams prefer not to test in the rain, unless absolutely necessary, as data collection becomes less consistent and the risk of damage is higher. So, I took the opportunity to photograph many details of the cars. For example, I took some shots of the drivers' names written on the top edge of the doors, of the inside of the cockpit, of a few sponsor logos, of the Porsche branding engraved on the wheel rims, of the raindrops that had settled on the cars, and of this writing sentence, "Rise like a phoenix." This is a wordplay often associated with Francesco Fenici, another driver for the team, based on the similarity between his surname and the mythical bird. I also photographed the cars moving in the pit lane, often focusing on the mechanics at work as the drivers returned to the garage. The large puddles formed by the rain created a mirror effect on the asphalt, reflecting the image of the cars. Around 5 p.m., Nicolas Pogliatti, the other driver for the driving experience, stepped out of the garage with an umbrella, heading towards the pit wall, and looked out onto the track to assess the situation. A couple of minutes later, Bertonelli got into the car and completed a round lap. Once back in the garage, he told the team there was simply too much water on track, something you can clearly notice from the amount of spray the Porsche was producing when it returned to the pit lane, despite the low speeds. Despite that, about half an hour later, Pugliatti and Bertonelli went back out on track, stopping in the front row grid slots. From there, they carried out a practice start, and then they repeated the procedure for a couple more laps. After completing them, the two drivers returned to the pits, and the test day came to an end at 6 p.m. Once the track activity had finished, with no further running scheduled for the following day, the team began packing everything up, loading the cars and all the equipment onto the trucks. In under 20 minutes, the garage was completely emptied, and the machines that had just completed the practice starts were loaded onto the team transporters. And so, that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next episode, which will focus on the 6 hours of Imola, the second round of WEC's 2025 season.